Throughout history, there have been scientific experiments so shocking that they are now strictly banned. Some of these studies were conducted under the guise of progress, while others were outright sinister. Today, we're diving into 10 of the most disturbing and prohibited experiments ever conducted. Some were psychological, some were physical, and others were so cruel that they're now classified as crimes against humanity. Let's begin. First, we have the Stanford Prison Experiment, one of the most famous yet disturbing psychology studies ever conducted. In 1971, psychologist Philip Zimbardo set up a mock prison at Stanford University and assigned volunteers to play either guards or prisoners. What started as a simple role-playing experiment quickly spiraled into something dark. The guards began psychologically abusing the prisoners, subjecting them to humiliation and punishment. The prisoners in turn became submissive and mentally broken. Some had emotional breakdowns, while others refused to eat. It was supposed to last 2 weeks, but after just 6 days, it was shut down because of the extreme psychological distress it caused. This experiment is now banned because it demonstrated how quickly people could turn to cruelty when given unchecked power. Next is the Milgram experiment, conducted in 1961 by psychologist Stanley Milgram. It was designed to test how far people would go in obeying authority, even if it meant harming others. Participants were told to administer electric shocks to a stranger whenever they answered a question incorrectly. In reality, the shocks were fake, and the stranger was an actor. But the participant didn't know that. The shock started small, but the voltage increased each time. The stranger would scream, beg for mercy, and eventually fall silent, pretending to be unconscious or even dead. Despite their discomfort, most participants continued shocking the person simply because the experimenter told them to. This chilling study revealed how obedience to authority could override personal morality, and it has since been deemed unethical due to the severe emotional distress it caused. One of the most infamous real-life experiments was Project 4.1, a secret U.S. government study conducted after nuclear testing in the Marshall Islands. In 1954, the U.S. detonated a hydrogen bomb much more powerful than expected, spreading radioactive fallout over nearby island communities. Instead of evacuating the residents, scientists decided to study the effects of radiation exposure on humans in real time. The islanders suffered from burns, cancer, and birth defects in the following years, and many never knew they were being used as test subjects. This unethical experiment led to international condemnation and stricter regulations on nuclear testing and human experimentation. If you think that's bad, let's talk about MKUltra, the CIA's secret mind control project. This program ran from the 1950s to the 1970s and involved drugging unknowing subjects with LSD to see if their minds could be controlled. The CIA conducted experiments on prisoners, soldiers, and even ordinary civilians without their consent. Some victims were kept in isolated sensory deprivation chambers for weeks, subjected to hypnosis, and given mind-altering drugs that left them permanently psychologically damaged. Some even died. When the project was exposed, it became one of the biggest scandals in U.S. history, and non-consensual human experimentation of this kind is now strictly banned. In 1939, psychologist Wendell Johnson conducted what is now known as the Monster Study, one of the most unethical speech experiments ever performed. It was designed to test whether stuttering was learned or biological, and to do this, Johnson experimented on orphan children. Half of the children were praised for their speech, while the other half were constantly ridiculed and told they were developing a stutter. Those in the negative group became deeply anxious, self-conscious, and some developed actual speech disorders. The long-term psychological damage these children suffered was so severe that this kind of research is now considered inhumane and illegal. Now let's move to something even darker, the Nazi experiments. Conducted during World War II, these experiments took place in concentration camps and involved some of the most horrific acts imaginable. Prisoners were subjected to freezing tests to see how long they could survive in extreme cold, injected with deadly diseases, forced to drink seawater, and even had their limbs removed and transplanted in grotesque attempts at surgery. Some were experimented on without anesthesia, leading to unimaginable pain and suffering. The horror of these experiments led to the creation of the Nuremberg Code, which established ethical guidelines for human research and made sure such atrocities would never be legally repeated. Similarly, Japan's Unit 731 was responsible for some of the most disturbing human experiments in history. Operating during World War II, this secret biological warfare unit conducted live vivisections, meaning prisoners were dissected while still alive. They'd also injected people with the plague, exposed them to frostbite, and tested biological weapons on them. These experiments were so gruesome that they remained secret for decades. Many of the doctors involved were never prosecuted, but their actions are now considered war crimes. Another deeply disturbing study was the Little Albert experiment. In 1920, psychologist John B. Watson wanted to see if fear could be conditioned into a human. He took a baby, known as Little Albert, and exposed him to a white rat. At first, Albert was not afraid, but then Watson began paring the side of the rat with loud, terrifying noises. Over time, Albert became terrified of the rat and anything that resembled it, including dogs, fur coats, and even Santa Claus beards. The baby was never desensitized, meaning he was left with lifelong fears. This experiment is now banned because of the severe psychological harm it inflicted on a child. Another horrifying case of unethical experimentation was the Guatemala syphilis experiments. From 1946 to 1948, U.S. researchers deliberately infected prisoners, soldiers, and mental patients in Guatemala with syphilis and gonorrhea. The victims were not told they were part of an experiment, and most received no treatment. This was done to study how the diseases spread and to test possible cures. When this experiment was uncovered decades later, the U.S. government was forced to apologize. Today, experiments like this are completely illegal under human rights laws. Finally, we have Operation Midnight Climax, a CIA operation that sounds like something out of a spy thriller. In the 1950s and 60s, the CIA set up secret brothels where unsuspecting men were drugged with LSD by prostitutes. The goal was to study the effects of LSD on human behavior, particularly in sexual situations. The men were watched through one-way mirrors as they unknowingly underwent mind-altering experiences. None of them had given consent, and many were left mentally disturbed. When this operation was finally exposed, it was one of the most scandalous revelations of the CIA's unethical activities, leading to stricter government oversight of human experimentation. These experiments were not only unethical, but in many cases, outright horrific. They serve as chilling reminders of what can happen when science and power go unchecked. While many of these studies led to stricter ethical guidelines, the damage they caused can never be undone. Let me know in the comments which one shocked you the most, and if you want to hear about more banned experiments, make sure to stick around. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more videos. Until next time.